All right, my friends. Today's Daf Yomi is Kesubos Daf Lamed Zayin. Kesubos Lamed Zayin. We're going to start on Lamed Vav Amud Beis around 20 lines from the bottom. Hold on. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda the Gemara had suggested that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says in a circumstance where a woman was captured, that we don't assume she was assaulted and he has to pay the kanas, and maybe it's Rabbi Yehuda says we don't want the assaulter to benefit, and so therefore we make him pay the kanas under these circumstances. It's not that we're so sure that the woman was not assaulted. It's just that we don't want the person who who assaulted her to this terrible thing to get off without having to pay. So that's the explanation, that that we don't want the sinner to benefit. So Abaye explains the time of Rabbi Yehuda is really the reason, the explanation for Rabbi Yehuda, that we just don't want the sinner to benefit. Is that really the explanation? But Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda taught Shavuya Shenishbeis. If there's a captive woman who's captured, Harehi Biktushasa, then she retains her holiness. And Afilbas Esar Shanim, even if she's 10 years old, she gets the Kesubos Samatayim. She gets the Kesuba as though she was a virgin of 200 zuz. And there we can't say there, the husband who's marrying her, he's not a sinner. So why would we say the reason is so that the person who's paying the money should not benefit? He's not a sinner, he's her husband. So Ika. So Gemara says, Hasam Nami, no, there too, no, there we're worried. The reason why we say her ksuba is 200 zuz is because we're worried that otherwise the people will be afraid to marry her because they'll think that she's not as valuable, or it's not a desirable bride. The Sava Rabbi Yehuda B'Ktushasa Kaima. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda really say she retains her holiness and her sanctity even though she was captured? Vatanya Podes Ashvuya. We learn in the Brisa, one who redeems a captured woman, Isa Ena, he's allowed to marry her. But if he testifies about her, Lo Isa Ena, he's not allowed to marry her. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, Ben Kachu Lo Isa Ena. Either way, he's not allowed to marry her. So the Gemara explains. So Rabbi Yehuda clearly says you're not allowed to marry her. If you're a Kohen, you can't marry this woman who was captured because the presumption is that she was assaulted. Gemara says, wait 1 second. Gemara says, Hagufa Kasha, the Brisa itself is difficult. Amris Hapodes Hashvuya Isa Ena. First you said that the one who redeems the captured woman, he's allowed to marry her. V'hadar Tana Meid Ba Isa Ena. And then it says, but if he testifies that she wasn't assaulted, he's not allowed to marry her. So it doesn't make any sense. Mishum Demeid Ba Isa Ena, because he testifies about her, he's not allowed to marry her. Where it says Halo Kasha. Well, that's not difficult. This is how we read the Brisa. One who redeems the woman and he testifies that she was never assaulted, Isa Ena. Then he's allowed to marry her. But if he just testifies about her, but he didn't redeem her, well, Isa Ena, that's not enough. And the Gemara is going to explain, because if he redeems her, it shows he's spending the money to redeem her, and we say that if he wasn't certain that she was not assaulted, he would never have spent money to redeem her. So therefore, he obviously redeemed her in order to marry her. Rav Huna Berei Rabbi Yeshua says no. Olam Kidikatani Rabbi Yehuda. No, he says no. We're Olam Kidikatani. It's really like we said initially. Yeah, don't amend the Brisa. And Rabbi Yehuda the Ram the Rabbanan Kamalahu. Rabbi Yehuda was speaking only according to the position of the rabbis. He was saying, he says, according to me, either way, I would say you can marry her. Because I say she's Biktushasa Kaima. But according to you, but according to you, by the way. But according to you, who say she's not in her ketushasa, either way, you should say she's not allowed to marry. That's that's how you should say it, because she's not in her ketushasa. The Rabbanan, whereas the Rabbanan say apodes hashvuli made by Yisana, whereas the Rabbanan say no, if he redeems her and if he redeems her from captivity and testifies her, he can marry her. Why? Because lo shadi inish zuzi bichdi. A person doesn't toss their money around for nothing. But made ba kedi. But if he testifies her about for no reason, well, then he can't marry her. Shema einav nasaba. Lest he put his eyes upon her in order to testify about her, just so he can marry her. So Rami Rav Papa Bar Shmuel Rav Yosef. So Rav Papa Bar Shmuel raises a challenge to Rav Yosef. He says, "V'sava Rabbi Yehuda b'kedusha sakaima." Does Rabbi Yehuda really say she retains her holiness? V'atanya. We learned in the Brisa, Ki Yoresh in Iskaira. Let's say there's a girl who converted, Ras Adam, and then she sees the blood. Rabbi Yehuda says, Daya Shata. Rabbi Yehuda says, we can assume that this is the first time she saw blood. We're talking about a case where she was dealing with Taharos, and we don't have to make a decree that she saw the blood going back 24 hours to say that all the taharos that she touched from the time she went to the mikvah until now were tamei. Because even if the blood went out from yesterday and it was just retained in the walls of the Beis Harachem of the woman's body, so nevertheless she was not Jewish yet, and a woman's blood is not tamei unless she is Jewish, and so therefore we would have say Rabbi Yehuda says Daya Shata, and Rashi adds to this. And if you'll say, well, maybe we should be concerned that when she immersed, she became Tamei and it left immediately. It's Tumah Lemafreya, and it's just retroactive Tumah, and that's rabbinic. And and in this case, the rabbis did not make the decree. So the Gemara says, whereas Rabbi Yossi says, Harei kechol hanashim, no, she's just like every other woman. Rabbi Yossi says, we do say she's tamei going back retroactively we do say me'es le'es she is tamei. And then the Brisa continues, she needs to wait 3 months before she can marry somebody. And that's to distinguish between the zera of kedusha and the zera shalom kedusha. The zera, if the child was conceived from a Jew or from somebody who was not Jewish. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi allows her to become betrothed and to get married immediately. But anyway, we see from this question that Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that when she was not Jewish, she became pregnant. And so therefore, how can Rabbi Yehuda say that if she was captured, she retained her sanctity? So the Gemara explains, you're asking me a question about a captured woman from the case of a convert. They're two totally separate things. The convert, the girl who converted, she wasn't protecting herself from being violated, whereas the captured girl was minter nafshe. She wanted to protect her sanctity. So therefore, that's why Rabbi Yehuda says we know that she was not violated. So the Gemara asks, "V'rami shvuya shvuya," but then throw the case of the captured woman. There's a contradiction between that against another captured woman, as in a Brisa that states the Tanya Giore. So Rav Papa Bar Shmuel asked this question to Rav Yosef because we have a Brisa which states that Giores v'ashavuya v'ashivcha sheniftu v'sheniskairu v'shtachru yiseres albenos gimel shana v'yom echad tzrichen lahamtem gimel chadash and divrei Rabbi Yehuda that the convert and the captured woman and the slave who was redeemed, if they're over 3, they need to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yehuda says clearly the captured woman, we have to wait 3 months to make sure that she was not impregnated. Whereas Rabbi Yossi allows her to become betrothed and to get married immediately. So we see from here that Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that she was violated. So the Gemara says, The Gemara says that Rav Yosef responds to this question, Ishtik, he was quiet. Amar, he says, Rav Yosef to Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, Midei Shmielach Baha, did you possibly hear something about this matter? Amar, yeah. So Rav Papa says, Hachi Amar Rav Sheshes, Shira'ua Shanav Allah. Yeah, we're talking about why does Rav Yehuda say she has to wait? Because we saw her that she was violated. We actually saw that she was violated. And that's why she has to wait 3 months. Well, the Gemara says, my time with Rabbi Yossi. Well, if that's the case, why does Rabbi Yossi say she doesn't have to wait? So Amar Rabba, Kasavar Rabbi Yossi, Isha Mizana Meshameshes B'moch, Shalotis Aber. Because Rabbi Yossi is in the position that if the woman was involved in this relationship, she would immediately use a moch, which is a birth control that she would put inside her body after intercourse to withdraw the seed. And so therefore, Rabbi Yossi says she would have that ready and she would not become pregnant. So the Gemara says, well, Bishlam Giores, I understand why a convert would do that. Kivan de Datali Giure. I understand why a convert would do that, would have the moch ready because she intends to convert. And therefore, Mintur and Avsha, she'll protect herself. Shavuya Nami. I understand why the captured woman would also do it. She doesn't know where she's going. She thinks she's about to be released. So she has the milk ready. Shifchanami, the Shamam Pimara, also the slave girl, I understand. Maybe she heard from her master that she's about to be released. So she's going to have her milk ready. What about this girl who was suddenly released because she was struck in a manner where her tooth or eye were knocked out? That's a Canaanite slave is given freedom. Michael and Mamer, what would you say under those circumstances? Why is she allowed to get married immediately? She wasn't expecting to be released, so she wouldn't have had the milk ready. So the Gemara answers, Well, I'm a Rabbi Yossi. And if you want to say that if it's a sudden release, Rabbi Yossi would not say you don't have to wait 3 months. Can't be. Are anusa mafuta. Anusa mafuta, these are cases which happen memela. The assault happens instantly. Let's leave aside the mafuta because people take that text out. The great rabbis, some of them take that word out because it doesn't really make as much sense in this context. V'tanya anusa mafuta tzrichas la'amtin gimel chadashin. So even Rabbi Yehuda says that anusa mafuta, the assaulted woman has to wait 3 months, whereas Rabbi Yossi matar yaris v'nasim miyad. He allows her to get married immediately, and she wouldn't have had the moch handy under those circumstances. She doesn't need to. The way of stopping the pregnancy is not only through a moch, but a woman who was mezana, she knows how to twist her body to prevent her from becoming pregnant. And so therefore, isha mezana misapechas kedei shelo tisaber. So that's what Rabbi Yossi was saying. She twists her body. V'idach, and whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, Chashina and Shem alone hepcha, yafa yafa. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, she has to wait because we're concerned that maybe she didn't twist her body sufficiently, and so therefore she would possibly become pregnant. So the Gemara says, what's the source of this principle which we've been discussing? It's called kimle b'derab, meaning that in the case where there's a more severe penalty and a lesser penalty, we only give you the more severe penalty. The Gemara cited the verse from Shemos Mishpatim. It says when the two men are fighting and they intend to strike each other, and then they strike the woman. If she does not die, if she does not die, I know she anish. Then you pay the penalty. But if she would die, you would be exempt. So that's the source for the concept of kimle b'deramine. So Gemara asks, is that the pasuk me'asam nafka? We learn that from a different pasuk. Kedei risha, so that if you strike him, mishum risha achasat tamichayv, you're only punished for one thing. V'yata machayv mishum shtei rishayos. You're not going to be liable for lashes and a monetary penalty. So the Gemara says, well, the answer here is Chada b'miso mamon, chada b'malkos mamon. One is to teach us the law of kimle b'deramine when it comes to death and money, that you only get the death and not the money. And one is when it comes to lashes and money, you only get the lashes and not the money. Utsricha, we need both cases. The Yashmina Miso Mamon, because if we had the case of Misa and Mamon, if we had a case of death and money, we would say Misham Dika Ibn Neshama. What's the reason why you don't have a monetary penalty? Because you're going to die. Avol Malkos and Mamon, but lashes and monetary payment delay Ibn Neshama. There's no death there. A Malone. I might say there you do have the monetary penalty. The Yashmina and Malkos and Mamon. And if you want to have the case of Malkos and Mamon, I would say Misham Dolo Chamir Isure, because under those circumstances, it's not as strict, and so therefore, since you didn't violate as bad a sin, therefore we only give you one penalty of a miso mamon, but the death penalty you did something much worse. The Chamir Isura, your penalty is much worse. Your sin is much worse. A malone, maybe you do get both penalties. Tzricha. Therefore, we need both. Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, Damar Loko, Meshalem. And according to Rabbi Meir, who says, like we saw before, that when it comes to lashes, we don't say Kim Lebedaramine, you do have the monetary penalty. Tartu Amale, why do we need both psukim? Avason, Anoshe Anesh, and Kedei Rishaso. So the Gemara explains, Chadav Miso Mama wanted to teach us this law of death and money, that there's Kim Lebedaramine there on top of Lamed Zayin of a base. I want us to teach us the case of Miso Malko. So in one case, we're saying where it's death and money, we say Kimwe B'Daram. Maybe you don't pay the money. One is where there's death and lashes, you don't give them the lashes. We need both verses. If we just have the case of Asonya, Anoshe Anesh, I would say because Miso Mama Misham the Chada B'Gufay V'Chada B'Mone, I would say Lo Avdina, because we're not going to punish him once with the body and once with the money. So therefore, you only get the more severe one. But when it comes to death and lashes, when it comes to death and lashes, both of them are on the body. I might say it's really just one punishment, and therefore we're going to give him the one punishment. And if we just said the law of Kimwe B'Daramine by death and lashes, the Tarate B'Gufay, law of Dunan, we might say there you don't get Kimwe B'Daramine because we're not going to give you two punishments on the body of Miso Mamon, but death and money, the Chada B'Gufay, the Chada B'Mone, one's on the body and one's on the money. Maybe there indeed we would do. In that case, we would give him both penalties. So therefore, we need both psukim. So now the Gemara says, but there are other psukim where we could have learned out Kimle B'Daramine. It says, if you're a murderer, you don't pay the ransom. So the Gemara says, Lamaway, why do we need that pasuk? So the Gemara explains, that's not teaching That's not teaching us the principle of Kimle B'Daramine. It's teaching us that if you're a Chayav Misa, you can't get out of it by buying your way out, by paying money. And the Gemara says, what about the pasuk that if a person's running away to a city of refuge, you're not allowed to take money to run away? So the Gemara says, that means it means you're not allowed to, again, you can't take money from him and say he's exempt from the exile. Why do we need both verses? Answers the Gemara. One is an accidental murder, and one is intentional, meaning to say one is you can't buy your way out if you did it purposely, and one is you can't buy your way out if you killed unwittingly. We need both cases. Amazing, because if we just have the case where somebody killed intentionally and you can't buy your way out of that, we would say Misham Nechamir Isura, because that's such a severe penalty, you can't buy your way out. But if you killed accidentally, unwittingly, then it's not as severe. Maybe you could buy your way out. But yes, and if you just have the case of the shogeg, you can't buy your way out. I would have said that the reason why you can't buy your way out there is because you're not sentenced to death. I'm amazed, but a purposeful killing, the Ika Ibn Neshama, where you're sentenced to death, I might say that indeed there, under those circumstances, you could buy your way out. So tzricha, we need both cases. And it says in the verse, asher shofech ba ki im bedam shofcho. So it says that the land will not be atoned with the blood that was spilled unless you spill blood, meaning to say, if you kill someone, you have to be put to death. But why do we need that? We already have this principle of Kim Levi Duram Minay. So the Gemara says, no, that's for the following price. How do we know She'em Nisarpa Egla V'Afkach Nimtza HaHoreg? How do we know that in a circumstance where the Egla Rufa, which is a decapitated calf, in a case where there's a murder and we don't know who did the killing, how do we know that if the Egla Rufa was decapitated because you didn't know who was a murderer and the Achach Nimtza HaHoreg, and then you find the killer, Minay and Shame Pochino? So how do we know that we don't release him and we are going to punish him? Because it says the land will not be atoned until the blood is spilled from him, and so therefore you have to punish him. And what about the pasuk that states, what about the pasuk that says you need to wipe away the blood? It's your responsibility to wipe away the murderer who spilled innocent blood. Why do we need that verse? We need that verse for the following explanation in the Brayta. How do we know that somebody is being executed by the court? It comes from the front of the neck. The Gemara explains, because it says, and we see from here, Hukshu, we compare Kol Shofchei Damim Egla Rufa. We compare all the people who are spilling their blood to the decapitated calf. Malalan Minatzavar, just like the decapitated calf is from the neck, so too Av Shofchei Damim Minatzavar. So too those who are being executed come from the neck. Where it says an imal alam mikofitz. Well, maybe just like the Egla Rufa comes from the cleaver umimul oref, and also from the back of the neck. Avkan bekofitz umimul oref. Maybe a person is executed has to come from the cleaver and from the mul oref, from the back of the neck. Says the verse, Amar Nachman, Amar Barvu, Amar Kra, Hafto Reacha Kamocha. The pasuk says, "You shall love your neighbor like you love yourself." Berorlo Misa Yafa means give him a beautiful death, i.e., a death where there's no pain, so he dies quickly. And that's from love your neighbor like you love yourself. So if somebody says to you, "What does the pasuk love your neighbor like you love yourself" mean? It means kill the person in a gentle way. Now you could say, well, what does this have to do with any? I mean, that is love your neighbor like you love yourself. Don't kill him. No, it means you can't turn back the clock. You can't undo this situation. But in every situation, you can achieve redemption. And so even when you have to execute a person, you could do it in a way which is a fulfillment of the verse, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Now the Gemara asks, what about the pasuk? It says, Kol cherem asher yecharam min adam lo yipadeh l'amali. Any cherem which you will redeem from a person, Kol cherem asher yecharam min adam lo yipadeh. Rashi says the expression of cherem is the expression of somebody who's liable for death, like zevach lelo him yecharem, like somebody who brings an offering for idolatry. So the Gemara's assumption at this point is that kol cherem, anybody who's chayav death, min adam, from a person, cannot redeem himself. Most you must will be put to death, and so therefore, lamaway. Why do we need this verse? We already know the concept that you can't be redeemed by money from the verse of what tichlu kofer l'nefesh rotzeach. Gemara says we need it because of the following brayso. And now we're going to learn the laws of erchen, of valuations. That the Torah tells us the value of each person. If a man says erchen elai, that I'm giving erech elai, I'm giving my value to the temple, the Torah gives based upon your age, And if you're male or female, what you have to give. So the Gemara says, this pasuk is teaching us, I don't know, somebody's being brought out to be executed. And the person says, oh, I'm giving that person's value to the temple. Well, this person is being brought out to be executed. So he, technically speaking, is a dead man walking. So minayin shalom rakum. So therefore, if a person says, I'm giving that person's value to the temple, he said nothing. Because it states, kocher masher yacharam min adam lo yipadeh. Because the verse says, kocher masher yacharam min adam lo yipadeh. And we say that yacharam means it's hektish. And the verse is telling us, so that a person who's liable for death, i.e. cherem, lo yipadeh, meaning say he has no value. Yachalaf kodem sheneg mardino. Okay, and I might think, well, even it's the same thing, even as long as he's in court first sentenced to death. If he wasn't found guilty yet, I might think you also, if you say I'm giving his value, that there's no redemption money. Tamalomar min adam v'lo kodem. Some of the people, but not all the people. The Gemara says, or Rechananya ben Akavya, da amar nerach, l'mnei dam of Kesubos. But Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya argues, and he says, even if the person is already been sentenced to death, he's still redeeming, because the Torah gives us a specific amount in the Torah for each person. It doesn't say, well, if this person is sentenced to death, there's no redemption. So if that's the case, hi, kol cherem avilei. How does he interpret this verse? Kol cherem asher yacharam, which means, if we're saying that somebody is liable for death, I can't redeem himself. We already pointed out from the pasuk typical kofer nefesh rotzeh. So what does he do with the verse kol cherem? So the Gemara explains, look at the Tanya. He learns it from the following brayso. Shmuel ben Osher Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer Fi Shematzanu Shematzinu Utumayim B'dei Shemayim. We see Umumasim B'dei Shemayim. We see that some people are sentenced to death from heaven. Like, for example, that if your ox was a muad ox, it was preordained to goring and it kills somebody, then we send to those circumstances that the owner is liable for death from heaven. There, and there we say he has to give the money and he achieves atonement. As it states in the pasuk, "Im kofer yushas alav," that if he pays the money, they pay the kofer and they redeem themselves from their liability of death from heaven. I might think you could also pay the money if you're liable for death from a human court and then be redeemed. So there they expound that somebody who's liable for death cannot redeem himself by paying money. I only know that this is the case by very severe deaths, which you can't do an atonement for them. What's an example? What's an example of that? So Rashi says, what are we talking about? Kivan de kralo lo piresh kol misos mistayach isha des hach chomra de emamono matzilo amisos chamuros. Umay niu, what are these misos chamuros? Kagona osa chabura ba'aviv Rahman al-San. Somebody makes a wound on his father, or go named Nefesh Misrael, or somebody who kidnaps a person in this week's parasha, Shein kapara ksuva b'shkagaso. There's no atonement written. Shein karas bizdono do chayav chatas b'shkagaso. It doesn't say in those cases, because those are not cases that are listed in the Torah that you're chayav kares for there. Because the Torah says you can only bring a chatas for those cases that are, if you did intentionally, you're chayav kares. And now if you did accidental, you bring a chatas. But one who makes a wound in their father purposely, he's not chayav kares. And so therefore, also b'shogeg, he doesn't bring a chatas. So therefore, maybe we would say that's the case where you can't redeem yourself. But misas kalish nitnish gasol kapara. But if it's a lesser death where you can bring a kapara, and what's an example from that? What's a lesser death where you can bring a kapara? Like, for example, somebody worships idolatry, or Rahman al violates Shabbos, or does Kili Arayas. How do we know that in those cases also you can get out of it by paying money? Tamam or kol chayrim. Colon comes to include those circumstances. So we'll stop here. Everybody should have a good